for this session, I kind of have two main objectives, really. So one is to kind of discuss the idea of creating a safe space for facilitating mental health conversations and what that looks like from a conscientized approach. So, which is really just to say from a space of awareness about yourself and the person you might be, or the people you might be interacting with. And then understanding just a basic and general understanding of what counts as mental health, what counts as mental ill health. And I'll look at particularly a focus on racial trauma, because that seems to be a big theme currently, even within the COVID space. There's been a lot of um, racially traumatizing things already happening from, I mean, I mean, I can mention a whole list, but I think we're all quite familiar with some of the bigger things that have been going on. And it's really just about understanding how that can impact the person in terms of their mind, body, and psychology. So yeah, in the last session, like I said, I was telling Jen that I had a chance to kind of go through the last session. And I think this is a great follow on from that because, in the last session, you guys addressed power, privilege, and oppression, and understanding that power operates discreetly, I think was a good thing to tap into, and how in the way that it operates discreetly perpetuates privilege and oppression, right? When we're speaking mental health, we're talking about entering a space that undoes the trauma of the power and oppression and privilege dynamics, right? So when we're talking about facilitating a mental health kind of interaction, we're talking about having awareness of those kinds of social structural dynamics, right? Before you even get to having the conversation with the person and kind of trying to contain them and help them through what they're going through, mental health starts in outside. It starts in understanding how social dynamics work and affect the person and, cause oppression in their lives and the way that they navigate their lives. And all and any kind of mental health discussions are really, really just a practice of empathy and awareness, deep empathy, deep awareness of the person in front of you, yes, but also the context that brings them to you, right? And then, of course, when we're speaking awareness, we're not only speaking about awareness of, the people and the person that might be coming to you for assistance, but also awareness of yourself and how those same social structural systems play a role in your kind of way of navigating the world, play a role in perpetuating a position of privilege that you might have in comparison to the person that you might be engaging with, and what that means for how you need to be aware of how the world affects you or affects your perception of it, and what that means for how you need to be able to see what that could do, or how that could play out in an interaction with someone who might come from maybe the same kind of context or maybe an entirely different kind of context, right? Yeah, so like I said, I think this is important for us because what we're talking about here is a practice of awareness, and understanding, like I said, where you come from and what that means for interacting with someone who comes from a similar or a different context. And then lastly, one prominent thing that's been, like I said, affecting all of us is racial trauma. And we'll kind of speak to how some of the more common mental health diagnoses or problems like anxiety, depression, trauma kind of link into racial trauma, because those are also kinds of things that you'll come into contact with. But I want to use racial trauma as an overarching kind of entry point because it touches on a lot of things. But also I think it's something that a lot of us can kind of engage with, especially if we're moving on from a conversation about power, oppression, privilege. Especially in South Africa, I mean, race touches on everything really. And so it's something to also kind of be aware of when we're speaking about how can you create and hold a safe space for someone to kind of undo some of the harm that's been done to them by being a person who exists in the world for whatever it is that they might be having trouble with. So, like I said, I don't want to be your lecturer today. So I want to kind of go around and just starting with the idea of thinking about creating a safe space, right? And speaking to the fact that part of that is about self-awareness, right? And also starting to pick up an awareness of the people you might be helping. I kind of want to go around and let's talk about, who we are and the context that we come from and what you think that means about how you can create a safe space for someone. And then we'll kind of go into the more poster-based stuff. But yeah, just opening up about, I'll start. Maybe some people might be nervous. So I'll start and then go around about like, being aware of where I come from, how I understand the world, and what that means for, how it might impact on whoever I might be helping. So when I was writing this down, it seemed much easier to ask the question than to answer it. Okay, my context. So I'm about your average middle class Black girl who who has had the privilege of being able to, I say, go to a university, study, get a degree. And in that way, I guess I have certain comforts about the world and certain kinds of expectations. But also part of my, I suppose, training has been learning to be aware of the kind of context I'm in and what that could mean. So, for example, one of my practices is really to kind of talk to people about rest and getting enough rest and understanding that rest is a resource rather than something that deters you from being productive. A day off, where for me in a middle class context could be like, oh yeah, great idea, could potentially be harmful for someone who's in a working class context and literally needs to make fast, quick movements to make sure that they don't fall into a deeper hole than they're already in. Understanding how rest changes as a dynamic across social spaces, right? So what could be rest for someone who might be doing in a working class socioeconomic setting might look very different for someone who's in the 1%, might look very different for someone who's in my socioeconomic class, might look very different based on what we understand as rest based on race, for example. I know from my background as a firstborn Black girl, rest isn't something you can just like, you can't just chill in the house and be lax all day and wake up at 12 and cruise all day because, Black girls don't do that. You need to be up at like 6. You need to have cleaned the house in the first hours. You need to have, you know what I mean? So I don't know if that gives you an understanding of at least generally where I come from. But for me, that means that creating a safe space, again, means getting to put my experiences aside when I'm interacting with someone and using that interaction as a way to learn from them what their world and perspective looks like, so I can start to understand what would be a useful thing or to suggest or what would be what would be a way to kind of communicate a message about how they could potentially improve their experience of their lives. I don't know if that's making sense to anybody. Yes, kinda.
I'm seeing some nodding.
Okay.
Would anybody like to respond to what Boleti's just said?
This is also an opportunity to kind of, introduce yourself to, I suppose you guys all know each other, but yourself, your context, and what a safe space means for you based on where you come from, what you know about yourself. Yeah.
I see a hand from Koketso.
Yes. Oh, okay. Hey, Coquito.
You
Hi
can.
guys.
Hey.
So okay, so I'd say, I can also, relate to you. I come from a middle class family where there are expectations for me as a black female to be a homemaker, to keep the house in orderly fashion, etc. Right? But I think us having this conversation has made me also realize my my privilege as a black female, to say that being in a middle class is somewhat of a privilege because we do we are exposed to poverty, because my mother, she grew up in Davidson, which is a township. And, when I drive around in Davidson and when I'm in how they live versus how we have been living. So sometimes I think for me, I struggle with the privilege in inverted commas that I have as a middle class person who was able to go to good schools, get a further education, etc. And then I go back to a township and I see how people are living and how people are disadvantaged. And it does sometimes cause internal turmoil for me because I'm like, what can I do more of to help people? At the same time, I feel like I also have my own stresses. I'm a new mother to a 16-month-old. I just turned 22, so I'm young and I'm trying to find myself within this new role of being a mother. And the first few months of motherhood is very difficult for me. I struggle with postnatal depression, which is something that I feel like not a lot of people talk about, but it's something that people do experience. And I had nobody to turn to. So the few months of motherhood for me were very painful. They were very lonely. I felt misunderstood, but at the same time, because I live at home, I still have to adhere to the standards and expectations of my mother of what a young black woman should be doing and the role that she should be playing in the household, which is keeping the household clean and etc. And I think, the challenge is that our families in black families focus a lot on making women, creating women to be homemakers, and the focus shifts away from the boy child. And even if dynamics change where you've had a child, etc., and you're struggling with postnatal depression, that care is not there, that empathy is not there because you still have a role to play. There's expectations of the role that you should be playing. So it was a very difficult year for me as a new mother. And but with regard to where I'm at right now, means mother, I feel that I've become more bold. I have a voice, because I feel like I'm tired of being silent. I've become more assertive as well. During the COVID has made me self-reflect quite a lot as well. With regards to who am I, who do I want to be, what are the characteristics that I'd like to possess more of. So I want to be more assertive, I want to be more self-aware, etc. And I've seen myself exhibit more of those characteristics. And I will say this, that I am in a much better place versus where I was at last year. I feel that I am now getting more support from my family because I did experience that, guys. I actually experienced postnatal depression last year. And I was honest with them about it. And I think getting the support from my family has made such a huge difference. Um, but I'm juggling it all, and I'm in a much better space. I'm much happier now more than I was last year. So that's my context.
Thank you, Kogetsu. I'm glad to hear that you're in a much better space. Um, please don't mind me if I'm looking down. I'm just taking notes for things I want to kind of double back to once we've all kind of at our peace, because I think you're making some important points about, you know, thinking about what it is that's going on in your life, and in your social life, in your family life, in your emotional life, and being aware of that, and how that can impact, you know, how you might be perceiving an interaction with someone who's coming to you for, you know, assistance in that area of, like, maybe they're going through something, you know, being able to be aware that, look, I'm right now in a space where I'm feeling depressed or not well. I see your hand, Melissa. Thanks. Um, you know, that's something to be aware of, because that has an impact on how you interact with other people, or what kind of interactions that would be good for you or not so good for you. So that kind of awareness is really good to have. Thank you so much for sharing. Melissa?
Hi, everybody. I actually sent a message on the side today to say I'm not feeling well. So as per usual activity, I won't be taking part, but for me, mental health is such a big, I'm so passionate, probably because I have a mental illness. And but to start from everywhere, where everyone is starting, I'm Melissa Majikiza. And basically my upbringing, yeah, you know, everyone's saying middle class and all of that. It's, for me, I always feel it's difficult to describe that, because, for example, with me, I should be put under middle class, because my mom is a teacher, but she was a single parent with 4 kids, in debt. I had to work since I was 14 to help at home. I had to play a mother role. She went through hectic mental health issues herself, where I had to step in, to the fact that I refer to my childhood as being robbed, because I had to mother my siblings. Everywhere I go in my town, they know me with, you know, the young lady with the prem and the 2 kids. And to the point when I got pregnant with my first child, everyone was like, oh, you had practice. And anyways, it was about time, because you're in your 30s. So it was a matter of, we couldn't afford, but we were not qualifying to be in the poor section, to the point where there's a lot of trauma that happened in my childhood, which I carried with me, which for me sometimes still gets me teary-eyed, because of how being in a black household where you can't really, we raised, like Mkwakis was saying, you and when Nanzika, you were saying, you have to wake up at 6, clean the house. And this is an everyday type of thing. And I remember even at Rez, they used to look at me funny, like, why are you waking up and cleaning every day? You swept yesterday. It's not like you did anything now. You wash the clothes, dry them in the tumble dry. You still ironing, you know? So I was almost raised in preparation of marriage. And to the point of, even today, there's things I want to say to my mom, to say, listen, when you did A, B, and C, this is how it affected me. This is how but I don't, because in the black household that I was raised in, where you're not supposed to be heard, you're supposed to be seen, but you send me to a multiracial school where I've learned to speak for myself. So how do we balance this whole thing? I still can't stand up to my mom. My sister, who's 8 years younger than me, can say, no, mom, like when I want to get something through, I have to talk to my sister, because in my head, I still have that fear mentality that was instilled in me, but there's still so much hurt. And COVID, I was home the first 2 months of COVID. I was in the Eastern Cape with my 2 boys. I also have my kids are like 14 months apart. So I have a 7-month-old baby. So I was home, and I had to deal with facing my mom every day. I had to deal with the hurtful words being said, because we are in a confined space. And eventually people step on people's toes. And because I had already trained, I don't take medication, thank God, anymore for my bipolar, which also was a tool. I had to teach myself tools to cope. I had to teach myself, now I know when I'm about to get an anxiety attack, and I know what tools to use to avoid getting to that place. I have a partner who understands bipolar, who's researched, who understands depression, who knows when I'm starting to get into the dark hole, and he knows how to try get me out of it. But now being home, I didn't have those things. And again, that time was bringing painful things and things were being said, I had to again go to a coping mechanism of, wait, you have to accept this is your mom. These are your siblings. This is how they are. You can't change them, but you in control of how you take things in and how you react to things. So it's tools I'm still teaching myself. It's meditation I'm still using. But during this time, things are so difficult because I look at my life now, I'm like, okay, you didn't do what it's the only thing that expected of you that you did was, yeah, you graduated. But again, that to get nurses, I had to lie because I did not qualify. But I couldn't afford to go to school. I had to work 1 year and then I had to lie to actually go to varsity, which I did. And now you've got 2 kids, you had them in your 30s, you're not married and you're living with a man. Oops. Never mind everything that you have done to help at home. The situation you're in and the situation of not getting income at this moment kind of puts you back in the, with the rest of the maggots when you're being looked at. But you're still not asking for a cent from home. As much as I'm not working due to COVID and not being able to work right now, I'm not begging for anything. But you still find, oh wait, but you're still being treated. But when mommy wants you to be an adult because it suits her, for whatever manipulation reason, you expect it to be an adult. So for me, it's this time has been so challenging, but also I found I'm learning so much. But for mental health, it is such a scary time because there's times I look at my kids and I'm like, oh my God. Like today was one of those days where I'm like, I'm not well. You are teething. You're biting my boob. You are screaming for God knows what. I have a training at 12 o'clock. Can everything just
chill?
Stop. Can I put a pause in it? But that's when I take a step back. But then again, when you're like to your family in the Black culture, guys, can you consider counseling? It's like, yeah. If
Touch on that as
depression,
well.
why can't you? Yeah, it's like depression. Why can't you be happy? Why? What? It's still such a taboo, and it's so funny because my mom, as much as we have our differences, she's so passionate. And she went and she went to further studies in disability teachings because she works in a public school and they get all these disabled kids and they're not qualified. And she's such an advocate of mental health and everything. And I remember when I made a call to say, I'm in hospital in a mental health institution in 2016. And they saying I've been misdiagnosed with depression all these years. I've got 2nd-degree bipolar. She said, no ways. That is the devil. And I'm like, wait. Are you not? you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you are people. Like, can you talk about this? If I carry on, this whole session will carry on till that is my piece of pie to share.
Thank you.
Pleasure, guys.
I think you said quite a lot. And quite a lot that I think we can all relate to, especially when we start to talk about mixed class families, right? And what that means for the kinds of roles we play in our families or are allowed to play in our families or are forced to play in our families. That's also quite important for what that means for how you relate to whoever might be coming to you for assistance. I want to take one more before I start to kind of, bring my own reflections into what this means for how to think about creating a safe space that is safe for both you and the person that you are assisting, or people that you might be assisting. Anyone else want to share?
Hi everyone. I'm Kokesa's sister. I know people say we sound the same. So you could see, yeah, we do sound alike. Thank you so much, Genevieve, for giving me the opportunity to join. So I'm Kokesa's sister and Kokesa's sister, sorry, and I suffer from bipolar. So I started exhibiting symptoms from a very early age, from the age of 5. And what triggered my bipolar was my sexual abuse when I was around the age of 4 and 5. And so I've struggled with mental health issues my entire life. And finally, I can say I'm in a space where I'm well medicated. I've had to also change psychiatrists as well to finally find the mix that works well for me. But it is a journey, and I liked the comments that Mel was mentioning with regards to, you know, meditation, etc., because it's a holistic approach to mental health. And you also mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very important because it makes you understand that every action has a, and something that was so powerful that Melissa had said is that as a black woman in your household, you are taught that you're not supposed to be heard, you're meant to be seen. But we go to good schools that teaches that you are heard. So the conflict between the two has contributed to us being in internal turmoil and crisis within ourselves, not knowing where do I fit in the world, what role do I play, because my family has expectations that I should be married by this age, I should have kids by this age, I should have a certain job that allows me to contribute to myself financially as well as home. So it's really a paradigm, you know, conflict for one. And thank you so much, Mark, because I related so much to your story. And I mean, we come from a family that has had depression. You know, even my sister or has been on antidepressants because she was diagnosed with depression. My mother has massive depressive disorder as well. You know, we've got a late cousin who's the same age as me. She'd be turning 30 in December, 15 days after me. And she passed away. She had bipolar. And it was actually a result of a side effect of one of her medications, which caused her to be diabetic. And we didn't know. She was undiagnosed. So we're very familiar with the impact of mental health. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. And that's why support is so important. And Mal, I'm so happy for you that you have a partner that understands you, because that's what you require. Because sometimes society does reject us because people are like, I don't want to deal with this. You know, especially for toilets. Like 1 minute you're this way, 1 minute you're the other. I can't keep up with your mood. So thank you for sharing that story. It really resonated with us and what our family has been through.
Thank you.
Oh, that's very.
Thank you for sharing. First, condolences for your losses, but also thank you for sharing. I think that kind of brings me into a point of saying that, if anything, one thing I can say is that a kind of inside joke that psychologists have is that we're probably crazier than our clients, if that's like a comforting thing. So a less jokey way of putting that is a concept that they call the wounded healer, right? Someone who, through their own kind of wounds and walking that journey of having to heal or walk that journey of healing themselves, they are able to kind of provide healing space for other people. That's not to say that we should pursue wounding, because I think it's clear that the world, gives us enough of that on its own. But it does mean that something about it does give purpose to greater purpose to some of the things you've been through, as opposed to just having been hurt and having no way to kind of give that knowledge of how you are getting on your feet or how you're coping or managing. There's purpose that can be made from some of the wounds and hurts that you experience. This brings me to a couple of things to say. So I kind of want to just start from the beginning and kind of bring back to some of the things to be aware of when we're in a space of facilitating a healing kind of atmosphere is, being aware of perhaps the class or privilege difference between you and the people you might be serving, right? I know you mentioned, for example, I have a similar kind of background of like, yes, I'm the family that grew up in, I'm part of the family that grew up in Joburg and Pretoria in the burbs, whereas a lot of my extended family grew up in like rural Limpopo and things like that. So you see that difference in lifestyle immediately. Likely if you had a similar experience to mine, you would have been the cheese girl in all of the cousins, or the cheese boy in all of the cousins, and you get to, your extended family, and they kind of see that difference. But that's something to kind of think about, right? So we're in a multi-classed society, and one thing to think about is your guilt, or get into kind of touch with your experience of your own kind of socioeconomic standing, and how that might play out with whoever it is you might be helping, whether you seem to have a higher or lower socioeconomic standing. That's is something to consider in terms of awareness of the kind of space you're creating and the kinds of assumptions you're bringing into that space, right? Self-discovery, what you're going through emotionally. Again, awareness of where am I at emotionally, either today or in my life in general, you know what I mean? Because mental health facilitation is very much emotionally based. You need to be able to tell what's your stuff, right? What's my stuff, and what's the stuff of the other person, right? That's in kind of everyday talk, you'll hear the term projection being thrown around quite a bit, right? It's usually okay, at least if you're a therapist specifically, we kind of bank on the client's projections because that gives us more information about what's going on in their world and their mind. But it is very important to make sure that you're not projecting your stuff onto the person or the people that you might be helping, right? So that's about self-awareness. If you are feeling triggered by something that a facilitation participant is saying, take a moment to kind of be like, okay, where's that coming from? Is that my stuff? Is that their stuff? And remember that the space you're creating, as much as it's a space that inhabits both of you in terms of a safe space, it's a space for the person that is seeking assistance from you. And so that's why you want to make sure that, where am I? Am I in a good space? Especially, and this is a point that I'll kind of come back to, right? Knowing when you're not the right person to help, right? Is very, very, very key, right? Because, it's just about, if someone's bringing something to you and you're already feeling triggered by it, having that awareness of saying, maybe I'm not the person to help you, I can refer you to someone, is as powerfully healing as knowing that you are the right person to help. Do you know what I mean? Again, looking at your social roles and your expectations of what social roles should be, right? A lot of that, like we've been saying, has been informed by our families, right? Our experience within our families, our experience within our families or within our schools. What are expectations that you have of yourself, that you felt placed on you, and how do you, what is your emotional experience about the expectations that have been placed on you, and kind of trying to get into a space of understanding what expectations have been placed on the person that you're assisting, and what that might feel like for them emotionally, psychologically. This is where a lot of the wounded healer stuff comes in, because you have the experience of being hurt, of being oppressed, of being traumatized, and just being able to sit within your own, like, okay, I know that this, one thing I can try and use an example, right? So when working with parents, for example, sometimes they obviously, get frustrated. Kids can be a lot sometimes, like, that's the truth be told. But when we're parents, sometimes we unconsciously become our parents, right? Even in the stuff that we found that they didn't do well with us, I mean, I raise my sisters, for example, and sometimes I'll be frustrated, and then I'll hear my mother's voice come through me. And I'll just stop in my tracks like, oh wait, this ain't the move. Because because I remember what it feels like to have been on the receiving end of that, right? And as someone who might be helping a parent, right, that's something I would bring to their attention. If I see them repeating some of the things that they maybe not had felt, but have not been conscious of how it impacted them. So I know some parents, and I know it's different across cultures, but like some parents will be like, my mom used to shout at me, nah, 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 this is how it was done, nah, nah, nah. And I'm like, okay, that's true. How did you feel as a kid when your parent was doing that with you, right? How do you think it's affect how your child might be experiencing it? So sometimes it's about getting the person into the space of their feelings and not what's happening as an automatic response in their mind. And then, of course, one other thing I want to kind of mention is self ambitions, right? Ambitions that you might have for holding that space, and being sure not to push that person beyond what they can take because you have a certain end goal in mind, right? This is something about expectations versus the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind is you walk into that space, and as much as you are the person facilitating healing and creating a safe space, you also want to model being a student of empathy, right? A student of coming into the world of that other person, right? And this helps a lot, especially in a context where, like I'm saying, we're a multi-class society, we're a multicultural society. So you never really know what you're stepping into when you're saying, I'm going to hold healing space for you, right? And the way to kind of really manage that is to, yes, know yourself. That's the key thing. Really get into a space of where am I, right? And then hold that in mind, but also come to a space of, I'm here to learn about what kind of support you need. And that means deep listening, right? Deep listening is hearing what the person is saying, but also starting to make links and connections about what that means about how they're navigating in society, right? If someone is saying maybe they don't have a close relationship with their parents, and close relationship with family is not even needed, that of course says to you, okay, maybe this person's family ties aren't so good, right? And that starts to give you a direction about where can I go in this interaction, such that I help them be aware of what it is they're communicating, and if it's aligned with what they actually are saying they feel and want. It's so funny that Jen was mentioning in the beginning, we're talking about, how do you kind of read social cues and things like that? Because usually therapeutic space kind of helps you with that. But even just noticing, is there alignment between what the person is saying and what the person is emoting, right? Someone could be like looking very angry, quarter to crying, but saying, I'm fine. You know what I mean? There's a misalignment between those two things. And often my go-to is speak to the emotion. Speak to the emotion, because sometimes people will say things that are just automatic tropes in their mind. Speak to the feeling that you're seeing there. And you don't necessarily have to say, no, you're actually feeling sad. But like, to me, it feels like you may be sad. Is a way of using yourself as a way to reflect something that you're seeing.
So,
Jen, yeah?
sorry to interrupt. I just read this really nice comment from Brian. So, I'm not sure, Brian, if you would like to speak to it maybe, because it's very important relating experiences as a facilitator in a space, whether it's a school or not. But most of these cases are mostly school-based. And the kinds of things that you encounter and the people that you meet and various challenges they may be facing and how they affect you. And the question that you're asking here is also related to seeking support. So maybe you could speak to Belady about that, or to the group.
Hi. Hi.
Hey.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
So, like a few years back, I met this young girl. I was facilitating at their school. And then, so we happen to be staying in the same area now. And then few days back, she calls me and says, she has lost her job and she was staying with her employer. And then the employer asked her to move out of the house because I asked her what's the problem, and then she said because she discovered that I'm going through depression, and then she doesn't want me in her house anymore. So the first resort that we did was like to think where can she go because she was having challenges with her family, and she was sort of like moving from places to places, and other people helping her with a place to stay because her mother had some difficulties, and then she was taken away from her. So now we offered her a place to stay, but we don't think maybe it's enough because we might not be well equipped to handle maybe such a situation or to do the right thing, because sometimes you think you are helping, but yet you are making maybe matters worse. So how do we then go about that rather than just offering a place to stay and not monitoring maybe her changes in behavior or other things, or we might not understand what she's going through fully. Maybe we might think, okay, now she's happy, like they just mentioned, but we can't read what's really happening. We can't really align the what she's saying and with her emotions or something like that. So if maybe we are willing to help her and we are willing maybe to get advice or guidance by someone who really understands what she's going through so that we give her best care or best attention.
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, one thing about at least being a mental health facilitator is that that's often the place where you kind of get stuck, just in terms of sometimes there's limitations to what you can do, which is not an answer that people love to hear. But so, for example, one thing that I say would be your biggest resource is building a referral network, right, for the things that you may not be able to do per se. So having found her a
Okay.
place, even though it doesn't feel like it's enough, is a big deal, right? Because just having a place to rest and be is in itself a big help in mental health wise, right? And if you have follow-up concerns, either based on, let's say, something you're seeing or just putting yourself in that kind of situation, right? So taking a moment to be like, if I was in that situation, what would I be feeling? What would I be going through, right? And kind of thinking, okay, if what would I need in that kind of situation? One, first and foremost, a place to stay, which is the biggest one, which you were able to manage from what I'm understanding. Two is that you maybe want to do a follow-up, like, have you been feeling? How's that been going? Can I, you know, can I offer you resources to maybe speak to someone that might not be me or me, for example, if you're there for a long-standing period of time. But your biggest help is to have a list of referrals. Who can I send them to that they need help? So sometimes that's about like just having that list of like emergency mental health numbers, SADAG, whatever, and trusting that they'll follow through on that, because that's also something you never really know, right? Beyond what you've done in the physical, you can only be satisfied with what you've done or try and do something extra. But yeah, having that list of like, maybe after I'm gone, these are numbers that you can call should you be feeling that things are getting worse or something like that. Having a social worker connect is a big help, just in terms of like, there are domestic stuff sometimes that you can't physically get involved in. And I'll speak to that now, because boundaries is a big thing around creating safe space, for example. And knowing which professional to call that can enter and intervene in that kind of space. So I'd say the biggest way is to, have the conversation, check in, be empathetic, hear what they're saying, and where you can, and where you see the opportunity to be able to help in terms of finding a place to stay or connecting them to someone who can help them, then those are your tools, those are your avenues of help. One big thing about, like I say, creating a safe space is knowing where the boundary is, because sometimes when you're wanting to help, you get into like savior mode, right? And that can be as harmful as whatever else that person might be going through, right? You want to, not just for the person, but for yourself as someone who is in the work of helping people, right? You need to know for yourself, where are your boundaries, right? Where are places that this is beyond me, this requires somebody else who knows better this area of work. Which is why I'm saying, like, knowing when you're the right person for the job, knowing when you're the right person to help. Sometimes we mistake the idea that because they're coming to me, I must be the person who must have all the answers. It's okay to not have all the answers. And it's okay to communicate that as well, so that there isn't that miscommunication or confusion. Like, okay, look, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to do what I can. Here's numbers that you can call, or I know of a place that might be willing to take you in, or, those kinds of things. Knowing, is this a place for me to be able to intervene? And if not letting the guilt of not being the all savior eat you up as well, because I think that's something that a lot of healers and helpers go through, of like, if I'm not the savior, then who else is there? And that's not good for you in terms of your longevity in this type of work, right? That's where a whole lot of compassion fatigue and things come in, but also for them, because you don't want to be their dependent. Am I saying it the right way? You know what I mean? You don't want them to take their dependence off something else and put it on you, right? Because all that communicates is they can't do it themselves. They need somebody to be their savior. And part of the healing business is not creating a savior complex between you and the person you're helping, right? Knowing that, okay, look here, I'm not the right person to be able to help with this, either for lack of resources or just because maybe it's a triggering thing for you, right? Sometimes we may think that because we've been through it, we're also the person to help. And in cases where you've actually gone back and healed that trauma for yourself, that is true, right? Because you've done the work of working through some of that pain and anger and trauma and stuff. But if you're feeling like hotly triggered by something, do not, sacrifice yourself for somebody else either, because that's not helpful for anybody in that kind of situation. I don't know if that was a helpful answer. Yes, Jen.
Brian, do you want to respond, or? Okay, sweet. Thank you so much. We've got a question from Gerald, a very important one, because it speaks to that idea of somebody not being able to do something for themselves. So what happens when they feel like they can't do it and they happen to call you because they can't do it by themselves? Do you assist, or do you say you can't help? When you really want to help, but also scared of becoming a savior. So also, what if you want to be a savior, Gerald? That's a lot of different complex thoughts. But it's so true. That's exactly the way you wrote that is so true.
Yeah.
That's exactly the thought process.
Yeah. So what happens if they're calling happen to, they can't do it by themselves? A lot of it is judgment call, I have to say, right? Because each situation is unique to the people involved, right? Unique to you as you are as a person, and to the person who is asking for your assistance, right? So it really is for you to kind of sometimes it'll be a trial and error thing for you to be able to figure out that, okay, this is not a place that I can venture into again. But it is about for you, and this is something that I think we often, what's the word? Oh, I forgot the word, but take for granted, for lack of a better phrase. But intuition, your intuition never lies to you. You know when you're entering into a situation that's like, you're right. Often we all ignore because then there might be that desire to want to be the savior, right? But one thing that, and that's, I suppose, a facilitator and a healer's best tool is their intuition. Your intuition never lies to you. You can ignore it, you can do whatever, but it always serves you truth, right? And yeah, the idea of what if you want to be the savior, that one's that one's tricky. I suppose it depends where that's coming from, because it can be and by here savior I mean someone who's in a position to help, right? Then, and you can help, that's the only time you should venture into something. If you're in a position to help and you can help, then follow through. But if someone is approaching you for help and you know you really can't help, but now you're trying to activate savior mode, that's harmful to the person, right? First and foremost, and to yourself in the long run as well. And the idea here is to, again, create and hold a safe space. That's about integrity, right? So that means that if you know you cannot hold a safe space with integrity, then you shouldn't, because you're now creating the idea that you're helping that person when actually you may be harming them, right? In addition to some of the stuff they're already going through. So it is about, and that's something that I suppose all kind of healers and facilitators need to think about, is that, is it me sharing? No. Oh. Anyways.
I think, I'm not sure if you're sharing a screen by accident, but
I think
that's fine.
No.
It's gone. It's gone now.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is, like I said, and I want to kind of maybe go into the next thing here, but definitely integrity is a big thing about holding a facilitation space and creating a safe space, right? And it's about putting aside your ego, essentially, right? Because, you know, wanting to be a savior is about wanting to be desired as the hero in the situation. And the thing that is of most importance here is the person that's seeking help, not not hero fantasies. And then boundaries. And maybe here's something I can kind of quickly turn to. Maybe now I can share a screen. Quickly turn to the poster just as we're looking. But yeah, boundaries are a big thing. So for example, in oh, here it is. In just let me know if you can still hear me.
We can still hear you, and okay. It's coming up. Let's see.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Should be able to see the What Are Safe Spaces poster. Yes. No.
I can see it, but I'm not sure if I'm looking at the right format. Yes, I can see it. Can everybody see the poster?
It's yellow.
It's yellow.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thanks. Boundaries. That's key. So, for example, me as a psychologist, I don't know if anyone, for some of us here who've been to therapy, you'll know that you have a certain appointment with your therapist. You keep that time. Depending on how strict your therapist is, you don't really be communicating too much outside of that therapeutic time or hour. And that is particularly because you want to make it clear that this space is guarded, right? Is protected for that person, but also for your relationship, right? And that's about letting them know that as much as, you know, you don't want outside influences kind of interfering with the kind of safe space you're creating, it also reinforces that this is a safe space, right? If you maintain those boundaries and help them maintain those boundaries, it reinforces the idea that when they do enter that space with you, that it is a safe space. And that's important for, also being able to bring up things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to bring up because there isn't that certainty that this is a kind of safe space, both in the physical sense, right? So for example, in a therapeutic space, you want to maintain consistency in when you're meeting and the time you're meeting, if you have that kind of opportunity to maintain that consistency, but also energetically, right? Assuring confidentiality, right? Making them know and assuring that what is discussed between you two is not going to be discussed with someone else without their knowing. Sometimes you have to make a referral, for example, and that's about just letting them know upfront that, okay, I'm going to have to make a referral. That means I'll have to let them know about this kind of information. Are you okay with that? So transparency, yeah?
Sorry to jump in. I know that I'm just being mindful also of the time and
time, yeah.
So just in relation to that, and I think in terms of everyone who is present here, the term boundaries, it's very easily said. It's very difficult to put in place if you don't really know how, even in personal situations. So I think important to note that I'm sure everybody is experiencing different levels of stress due to the pandemic, due to the lockdown, due to this kind of space that we're in now. And boundaries are very difficult to establish, right? Maybe with your employer, maybe with your partner. There are many situations. But to think through in this time now, how it's possible to put those boundaries in place and why they're important would be a really good kind of reflective exercise as well. But I just wanted to kind of speak to that and speak to the moment of and why boundaries right now are a boundary that you can set is super important for you, for your own well-being as well.
100%, yeah. And like I'm saying that, sometimes even like in the COVID situation, creating physical boundaries might be difficult, but it's also about thinking about relational boundaries, right? And that's in part about reflecting on yourself. What's comfortable for you? What's okay for you, right? That doesn't always mean it'll be okay and comfortable for the other person, but transparency is a kind of a way of understanding what would be good, what would feel good and safe for the other person. So being open to being corrected, being open to having someone say, that doesn't feel good for me, and not taking it as a personal offense, but understanding that it's just about their own sense of safety and boundary. Again, like I said, assuring confidentiality, being open about, okay, I'm thinking that maybe you're needing a referral and this is the kind of information I'll need to exchange, right? Assuring that at least energetically or relationally, they feel like the kind of space you're giving is safe, and that they don't have to worry about what's being said there somehow being brought back or being shared or anything like that. So I'll go to the next one, but this is something we've been speaking about already, just thinking about your context and how it interacts with the context of the students or people you might be helping, being aware of different various levels that might be affecting students and yourself, and again being aware that you need to be that holding a safe space is as much about awareness of what's happening in the world as it is about what's happening in the relationship between you and the person, right? Okay.
I have a really nice comment here from Gerald again on the boundary thing. Boundaries are extremely difficult to put in place as well as to maintain those boundaries, especially thinking around not only holding safe spaces with facilitation, but understanding that we also hold safe spaces for friends, partners, families. Setting boundaries in those spaces, specifically homes, become really challenging.
Difficult. Yeah. Boundaries have never been an easy thing to put in place. And this is something I say to everybody. Nobody likes boundaries, period, especially new boundaries, right? When you set a new boundary with someone, expect there to be a backlash of some sorts. Always. That doesn't mean you back down from the boundary, right? That just means that the boundary is starting to do its work, right? But it is, and that's important, especially when you're in the space of holding a safe space, right? You need to be committed to the boundary as much as you expect the other person to be committed to the boundary. That boundary is for both of you, right? So if you're crossing a boundary you set, you're in effect making it lose its power, right? It's not easy for anybody, myself included. By experts, a sort of boundary keeper. But nobody likes boundaries. Nobody likes to be told that this is a line that is not okay to cross, even if they care and love for you. Energetically, sometimes, it's uncomfortable, especially if that person is drawing a certain kind of resource from you, comfort, emotional, whatever kind of resource. When you put a boundary in place, you're kind of forcing them to readjust themselves, right, as well, in relation to that boundary. So that's not easy, but it is about just kind of holding fast, and expecting that when you put in a boundary in place, that they may not like it, but that doesn't mean it's a bad boundary to put in place. And this is especially when we start to speak to personal boundaries as well, right? Because I suppose that's where it starts. Once you're able to kind of start to hold your own personal boundaries, it's easier to hold the boundaries of a safe space, or at least you're practiced in terms of holding a boundaries of a safe space. But yeah, within your personal relationships as well, when you start to realize, hey, this has been something that's been not good for me, I want to set a boundary here so that it doesn't continue to happen. You're now creating a situation in which everyone who relates to you through that thing needs to readjust how they relate to you, right? And change is uncomfortable for everybody, which is why you'll get a backlash for, sometimes not always like screaming and shouting. It could just be like, now they're mad at you or whatever. But that doesn't mean you've made a mistake in guarding your own sense of safety. And similarly for when you hold a safe space. Now I see we're kind of maybe running out of time. Maybe tap a little bit into the racial trauma, and then we can kind of talk about the fun reflective exercise. All right, so I think you guys raised some actually excellent points just in terms of some of the ideas or myths or stereotypes around mental illness. Let's start there before I get to mental health. But mental illness, maybe as a personal experience, and I hear with, is it Mel and Colgate, I think, had said, with your kind of diagnosis, the feeling of feeling unstable or unreliable are some internal kind of feelings you might have, specifically with bipolar disorder, or even borderline, if we're talking about that. But any kind of mental illness, you'll feel just severely not outside of yourself, but sometimes severely unstable. But we definitely get some of the stereotypes that people who have a mental illness or are experiencing a mental illness are unreliable, might be crazy, might be violent, whatever else really. And a lot of that comes from misunderstanding about mental illness. And I'm even thinking of the story that I think Brian mentioned about the girl who was kind of basically fired for being depressed, right? A lot of employers think that people with a mental illness are more burdensome, for example, or more financially costly, and that being accommodative of them would, create just more problems. And all of that is really, really about just a misunderstanding of what it is to be mentally ill. So just looking at the poster here, like, what is mental health? It's a state in which you're able to function mentally, feel connected, feel open, feel that you're able to experience enjoyment, good feelings, enjoyment, love, but also that you're able to experience what would be called negative or rather more challenging feelings in a way that is normal, I want to say, which means perhaps it doesn't last longer than, say, a day or so, right? You're able to self-regulate. Mental health then isn't just the idea of being happy and good all the time. I think sometimes when people think mental health, they think, that 100 days of happiness challenge where you're just like, I'm sweet all the time. No, that's about something I always kind of say, that the goal is balance, not perfection, right? Balance being that you're able to experience the more positive and the more challenging feelings, all with like a good sense of capability. You don't feel overwhelmed by those feelings, right? Because also you can experience what would be considered positive feelings in a way that can be severely traumatic for you. That now I'm referring to like having a manic episode, for example, is when you're feeling good, you're spending all your money, you're going off, but it's actually like really traumatic for you because you end up, sometimes you're feeling so good, you end up ruining your life and spending all your, and clearing out your bank account and things like that. So it's not about feeling one emotion predominantly or predominantly. It's about being able to experience a range of emotions, right? At a normal enough pace, right? Which means that you're not like rapidly super high and then super low, right? You're able to keep like a balanced wave of like, man, today I don't feel so good, but I'm still able to like get through my stuff, that kind of feeling is fine. Or today I don't feel good, so I'm not doing anything, right? That's fine. And then the next day today I feel good, I feel nice. You see, having that kind of range of feelings, that's being healthy. So if you're asking, is it possible to get there? It 100% is. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a therapist and it's my job, but it 100% is. You're right. When we try and make life be one thing, that's usually the kind of thing that can get us into feelings of feeling unworthy or not seen or overwhelmed or whatever else the case might be. And this kind of speaks to the idea of joy, or what's a comparison being the thief of joy, right? And that's something that I think a lot of up and coming generations are struggling with, especially because of social media, right? There's that comparison between that person is on that level and I have to be there, or that's the only way I can be seen as successful, right? And a lot of it is often about figuring out what is success for you, right? What's good for you and your life? What makes you feel good? Because sometimes you could be looking at someone else's life, and chances are if you got some of the things that they had in their life, right, you wouldn't be happy or as happy as you think, right? Or you could not be seeing the stuff that's not flashy and shiny, right? Nobody puts their worst days on social media. They all put their best stuff there, right? So it's about also remembering that sometimes what you're seeing is not actually what is the truth or the reality of that person's life. Mental ill health in this kind of case would be like indicated by altered mood or a severely altered mood, right? When you are so overwhelmed by a feeling or a way of being that you can't function in your day-to-day life. That's when we're talking about perhaps depression or anxiety, and it literally interrupts your way of functioning in the world. And And this is where we might be talking about depression, anxiety, substance disorders, or here, as I wanted to kind of mention, racial trauma. There's something that impacts your ability to be able to function in the world in a way that doesn't require for you to depend heavily on another human being, right?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Boledi, I just wanted to jump in to say that we have another approximately 10 to 12 minutes that we can go over time, if that's okay with you. Just to hold that moment that you just ended off around racial trauma, there's been a burning comment from Gerald around that specific trauma. And I think, I'm not going to be going into detail and reading the whole comment. Gerald, you do have a moment. If you want to maybe speak on it, you can now. But I do think that speaking to, do you want to say something, Gerald, or not?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I was just thinking around the idea. Oh, sorry, I'm Gerald Kluter. My work is always centered around home and belonging as theater maker, as a creative. So, hi. I've been thinking that there's so much pressures that's been placed on young children, especially in our colored communities, where toys are being gendered or characterized according to gender, where boys aren't allowed to play with dolls because toys are gendered. And imagine that type of pressure that we already start placing on these young children and how it must affect their mental health. And then there's been this misconception around colored identity. And people always say that we don't have an identity. And it's something that I've been sitting with for quite a while, and it's something that really has been affecting me. And when you look at or think about it, we are categorized according to skin color: white, black, colored. When you hear white, you hear color. When I hear black, I hear color. When I hear colored, I just hear multiple colors, right? But when you look at black, for instance, in black people, there's a lot of different people or groups within the black community. There's Xhosas, there's Zulus. In the colored community, we also have different people. I don't know how to call it, because I do have an identity as a colored person. I'm a Nama person. I'm from Khoi lineage, So I mean, I do have an identity, and there's been like this misconception that I have been sitting with, and I just wanted to make that clear also and speak a bit about that, because it really also affects my mental health as a person that's colored. Yeah.
I think actually, thank you, Gerald, for sharing that, because I think that's a great entry into kind of thinking about racial trauma, right? When we think about racial trauma, often people think about the more obvious kinds of incidences, right? The racial violence, the more obvious, like a violent act happened in relation to that was in relation to race, but we never think of say erasure as equally violent as someone pulling out a gun, for example. It's subtle, more subtle, but also something that creates a traumatic experience, right? A severe stress experience, either of not being seen, not being recognized, and so also struggling to kind of place your own sense of identity within the society, within the world. And that just goes to say, and I just want to show the poster since we're on it, but that also goes to speak to, racial trauma is not something that only affects our, physical ability in terms of being physically hurt or anything like that, but it's a term that's ascribed to even to speak to psychological symptoms that people of color and Black people often experience after a particularly stressful event. And one thing that's interesting when we're speaking about racial trauma, and I think that's interesting because, we'll speak about it being after a specific event, but what's a lifelong event of erasure? Do you know what I mean? In which it is an ongoing event, really. There are some punctuated events that we see often in any kind of case, really. The name of the man is slipping my mind now. The American guy.
Fanon?
No, the recent guy who was killed by the cop and that
George Floyd.
Yes. Oh my word. Sorry. My mind is
Don't apologize. Sorry, we're going overtime. This is what happens.
But yes, so there are events like a George Floyd event, and then there are more insidious, systematic, long-going events that are like lifelong racial identity erasure. That in itself is a type of racial trauma, right? It's social, it's systemic, it is structurally supported, right? It continues and it operates that way. But yeah, one thing I want to mention that I think sometimes we also, especially when you're on the receiving end of a racially traumatic experience, there's something about those experiences that often make it feel like maybe it's just you who's experiencing that. And one thing about understanding, race-based experiences is that they don't happen in isolation, right? They are supported in our social structures, in our way of relating with each other. And that's how they operate and continue to operate. That brings us back to, I suppose, not last week, but the last session you had around power oppression and power navigating or working discreetly. It's that kind of thing. But I want to bring it back to the psychological part of it, right? It's not just the physical pain that you might experience in terms of racial traumatic stuff, right? It's not only what I want to say is, for example, an event like a George Floyd tragedy that happened, right, in itself doesn't happen in isolation in terms of, it's not just that violent event that happens, right? There's a whole lot of other things that build towards that, right? And long before the physical event happens, I'm sure he had experienced much more other forms of racial violence that impact, his way of being in the world, and similarly our way of being in the world, right? That impacts and starts to create a long standing feeling of fear and hypervigilance, right? And that kind of sustained stress also impacts our bodies physically. You can literally get body aches and headaches and insomnia and memory difficulties. Being on on the receiving end of racial violence, whether subtle or explicit. And this is where we kind of start to look into the mental health of what racial violence does. And we see it a lot, especially in communities of color, when we start to consider things like intergenerational mental illness, right? Mental illness that runs through different levels of the family. That in part is something that comes from the way racial violence operates on a social systemic level, right? It doesn't just affect you as an individual, but it starts to spread or get deeper into how we relate with our families, what we think is okay in terms of even basic things like a Black woman's role or a colored woman's role in the family, or how we even think of family roles speaks to sometimes is often connected to racial systems.
Okay, so sorry, I have to interrupt. Now we are so out of time that it's like, but this has been an amazing session. And in terms of the racial trauma section, there is a poster on that, and
and there'll be a manual that I'll send that they can all look through.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be forwarding that manual to Boitumelo, who will be forwarding it to everybody. In terms of rounding off the session, we would like to once again ask all of the facilitators to take part in a reflection exercise. This time we want to encourage you to use your talents that you might or might not have been able to use during this time when you're locked indoors and you're not being able to go to the theater and you're not able to rehearse. So we would like to ask you to channel some of that energy in the next couple of coming days and 2 weeks. But in terms of you reflecting, we'd like you to send us videos this time. So you won't be expected to write. Yay, you don't have to write stuff for us again. But Baledi came up with a nice exercise for you that you can do after the session takes place.
Yeah, so what we want for you to do is do something of a reflective monologue, either on mental health and its impact, or, you know, mental illness and its impact, or on racial trauma and its impact. So it's just a chance to kind of reflect on this session and kind of bring your dramatic skills to kind of give a sense of what you took away from this session. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reflect specific things that we spoke about, but, you know, the kind of things that drew to mind maybe creatively. But yeah, what we're looking for is like a 1-minute reflective monologue that speaks to mental illness or, you know, in whatever aspect, or racial trauma in whatever aspect, and send that through.
Yeah, thank you. So this is exciting. It gives you a chance to start exercising some of that, you know, rehearsal time that you might not have been able to do. But also I know that in theater and drama speak, monologue means only you are speaking, but we're open to you having a dialogue. If you want to have a dialogue in your video, you can. Just to know that the video has to be 1 minute long. I know that's going to be challenging, so we're okay with it if you send us something to max 1.5 minutes maximum. But we really want you to try and keep it short, because this is something that we want to edit into a larger video that will go together and onto the YouTube channel. So this is an opportunity also for you to be visible out there on the Keep the Dream Arts page, and we'll be able to share it amongst all of our social media pages as well, and a message that you might want to get out there. So Baledi was saying a 1-minute video that speaks to the topics discussed in relation to mental health, your response to what was discussed today. So remember, it doesn't have to be you know, reflecting on exactly what was said, but maybe what you took from it. And then racial trauma is also one of the themes that were discussed today. And you can choose how you want to portray that. And you also have enough time to come up with something that, you know, has a message that you would like to share. And you can play around a lot with video. I don't know if any of you've tried doing video in the meantime while you were on lockdown, or while you were away from the theater and away from the university or from the lab, but it's really a fun medium to play with, and it will provide some, hopefully some, you know, release from some stress to be able to work on something creative in the meantime. I'm going to give you the opportunity now just to ask any questions about the video. Does anyone have any questions? Everybody happy with that? Also, just to let you know, we're going to share this recording of this call. We're going to share it so that those who were not able to call in, because I know the network was really bad today, they can watch it. And then I'm going to ask Boitumelo to put the instructions for the video on the WhatsApp group. So you don't have to worry. We will put it into the WhatsApp group for you so that you know exactly what you have to do.
Can I get a copy as well?
Yeah, sure. Of the videos. Yeah, so that's there's going to be of course the call. Sorry. Yes, of course. So in closing, is there anything that any questions specifically about the video that anyone wants to ask, or if there's any concerns? I know we've gone over time today. Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Siambonga. Can hear you.
Yeah, just a bit of a confirmation. So we're just doing a self-tape of a monologue about anything to do with mental health.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay. So that's our only reflection.
That's your only reflection for this session. So you can have a lot of fun with it, you know. You don't have to worry about writing anything. You just need to put your creative energy into a video that speaks to these issues.
Thank you.
Okay, is there so I think we have to round off because it's been over time, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time, Boledi, and for this very engaging session. We're definitely going to have follow-up conversations with the facilitators going forward, and to let everybody know, I'm going to be sharing some contact details now for service providers that you can contact if there's need for counseling. And thanks again, Boledi. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on board for this session.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for being so engaging and open. It really has been a good session. I hope you've been able to take something good from it that you can use going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good Friday afternoon. Hey, it's time to have a weekend. Time for the weekend, eh? Yeah, I can see it.
Time for weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, Mel. Bye.
Thank you, Jane.